May 8th,
Hold still, this will feel
1945.
cold.
Texas
Steady
Hill
now, almost
Country.
in.
There,
24
secured.
Japanese women knelt in the dust of Camp Hearn praying for death before dawn. Their American captors had other plans. Plans involving bacon scrambled eggs and the most dangerous weapon in the United States military arsenal, kindness. The sun rose blood red over the barbed wire fence, casting long shadows across the compound. Ko Yamamoto, 25 years old, her uniform torn and stained with 3 weeks of accumulated dirt, led the morning prayer. Her voice cracked with dehydration as she recited the words she had memorized in basic training. Words about honor, words about duty, words about the mercy of a swift death over the dishonor of capture. Around her, 23 other women knelt in the Texas dust. Their heads were bowed, their hands were clasped, their bodies were skeletal frames wrapped in the tattered remnants of Imperial Japanese military uniforms. They were nurses, clerks, communication officers. Once they had been proud soldiers of the Emperor, now they were something else. Something their propaganda had told them was worse than death itself. American prisoners of war. 3 weeks ago, they had been captured in the Philippines. Ko still remembered the moment. The sound of American artillery, the chaos as their commanding officers fled, leaving them behind. The terror as American soldiers surrounded their position. She had closed her eyes, waiting for the bullet. It never came. Instead, rough but not cruel hands had searched her for weapons, bound her wrists with rope, and loaded her onto a transport truck with the other women. The journey to Texas had been a blur of fear and confusion. They had been processed through Manila, fingerprinted and photographed like criminals. Then came the ship across the Pacific, where they had huddled in the hold, whispering prayers and sharing their last rice rations. Finally, the train ride across America, through California, through New Mexico, into the heart of Texas. Ko had expected execution at every stop. The propaganda had been clear. Americans were monsters. They tortured prisoners. They violated women. They desecrated bodies. Every Japanese soldier knew the stories. Every soldier had been trained to save the last bullet for themselves. But the bullet never came. Instead, they had arrived at Camp Hearn 3 days ago. The guards had separated them from the male prisoners, German and Italian men, who stared at them with curiosity but no violence. They had been marched to this compound, a section of the camp surrounded by its own fence. And then, incredibly, their American guards had simply left them with no food, no water, no explanation. For 48 hours they had waited. They had watched the sun rise and set twice. They had watched American soldiers patrol the perimeter, but none had entered their compound. They had listened to the sounds of the camp beyond their fence. Men laughing, music playing, the smell of cooking food that made their stomachs twist with hunger. And they had prayed for death, because surely this was it. The Americans were letting them starve. Or perhaps they were waiting for them to weaken, waiting for the right moment to begin the torture their propaganda had promised. Ko opened her eyes and looked at the women around her. Fumiko Tanaka, 28, a trained nurse from Tokyo. Her medical bag still clutched to her chest, though all the supplies had been confiscated. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. But her eyes were still sharp, still calculating. She was counting hours, Ko knew. Counting how many hours until the dehydration killed them. Lieutenant Yoshiko Sato, 32, sat with military precision despite her weakness. She was a communications officer from Kyoto, daughter of an admiral. Even now, even here, she maintained her dignity. Her back was straight. Her uniform, though filthy, was buttoned correctly. She had tried to maintain order among them, tried to keep them disciplined. But what was the point of discipline when death was the only future? Private Yuki Nakamura, the youngest at 19, wept quietly. She was from Osaka, a clerk who had joined the military to escape an arranged marriage. She had wanted freedom. Instead, she had found war. And now she would find death in a Texas prisoner camp thousands of miles from home. Sergeant Micho, 35, the oldest and hardest of them all, did not weep. She knelt with her eyes closed, but Ko could see the tension in her jaw. Micho had been a soldier for 15 years. She had seen combat. She had killed enemies. She did not fear death. But Ko suspected she feared what would come before death. The propaganda had been very specific about what Americans did to capture Japanese women. Ko closed her eyes again and continued the prayer. Let it be today. Let it be swift. Let it be final. Death was no longer an enemy. Death was a friend they welcomed. Then in the distance, a sound, a low rumble. Engines. Kyo's eyes snapped open. Around her, the other women stirred. The sound was growing louder. Multiple engines, large vehicles, American military trucks. This was it. The end had come. Fumiko reached for Ko's hand and squeezed it. Her palm was dry and hot with fever. The dysentery was spreading. Three of the women were already too weak to stand. In another day, maybe two, they would start dying from the illness and dehydration even if the Americans did nothing. But the Americans were coming now. The trucks were getting closer. Ko could hear them clearly now. Two, maybe three vehicles. Heavy transport trucks by the sound of them. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking. Around her, the other women struggled to their feet. Lieutenant Yoshiko barked a command, her voice hoarse but firm. They formed a line, ragged, weakened, but still disciplined. If they were going to die, they would die as soldiers. The trucks appeared at the gate of their compound. Dust billowed around them as they came to a stop. The engines cut off. For a moment, there was only silence and the whistle of wind through the barbed wire. Then the truck doors opened. American soldiers emerged. Ko counted quickly. 15 men, no 20. They were young, most of them. Fresh-faced despite the dust and heat. They wore their uniforms casually, sleeves rolled up against the Texas sun. Some carried rifles, but the weapons were slung over their shoulders, not aimed. One man walked to the front, an officer by his bearing and the insignia on his uniform. He was older than the others, perhaps late 30s, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and eyes that were neither cruel nor kind. Just tired. He surveyed the line of Japanese women with an expression Ko could not read. He spoke to someone behind him, and another soldier stepped forward. This one was different. Asian features. Japanese-American, Ko realized with a shock. A translator. The officer spoke in English, and the translator converted his words to Japanese. "I am Captain Robert Morrison. I need to know your condition. Are you injured? Do you have access to food and water? Do any of you need immediate medical attention?" Ko stared. This did not match the propaganda. This was not the beginning of torture. What was this? The women remained silent, paralyzed between terror and confusion. The question hung in the air. Captain Morrison waited, his expression patient but concerned. Fumiko, drawing on some deep reserve of courage, stepped forward. She spoke in broken English, words she had learned in medical school. No food. 2 days, water gone, 3 women very sick. Need medicine. Morrison's jaw tightened. Not with anger, Ko realized, with something else. Professional bourgeois dismay. He turned to his men and barked orders. The soldiers scattered. Some ran back to the trucks. Others began setting up what looked like a medical tent at the edge of the compound. Morrison spoke again, and the translator conveyed his words. You will receive food, water, and medical care immediately. This is not negotiable. This is protocol under the Geneva Convention. You are prisoners of war under United States military authority. That means you are entitled to the same basic care as our own soldiers. Kyo's mind reeled. The same care as American soldiers? This made no sense. The propaganda had been clear. Americans were savages. They violated all rules of war. They showed no mercy. But here was an American officer talking about protocol, about the Geneva Convention, about care. Morrison was still speaking. The translator continued. I understand you have been without food and water for 2 days. I apologize for that oversight. It will not happen again. My men are preparing the meal for you now. You will eat. You will drink. You will receive medical attention. And then we will discuss your situation. He paused and his tired eyes swept across them once more. You are no longer in danger. You are under the protection of the United States Army. Protection. The word echoed in Ko's mind. Protection from whom? From what? They were the enemy. Why would Americans protect them? Morrison turned and walked toward one of the trucks. The soldiers were unloading crates. Large wooden crates stamped with English words. Ko could not read. The smell hit her then. Faint but unmistakable. Food. Real food. Her stomach, which had been a tight knot of fear, suddenly unclenched and cramped with hunger, so intense it was painful. Around her, she heard quiet gasps as the other women caught the scent. One soldier, younger than the others, pulled back the canvas covering on one of the trucks. Inside were more supplies. Blankets, medical equipment, containers of water. So much water. Ko felt tears prick at her eyes. She did not understand. She did not understand any of this. Lieutenant Yoshiko spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Is this real? No one answered because no one knew. But these women had no idea that Camp Hearn's commander had a very different protocol in mind, one that would violate everything they had been taught about their enemy. And it all started with a simple question from a Texas ranch boy who had never left his home state until the war. If you or your family members served during World War II, especially if you encountered prisoners of war in Texas, share your story in the comments. This history matters, and your memories help keep it alive. Now let's meet the Americans who changed these women's lives. Captain Robert Morrison was not supposed to be here. By rights, by rank, by combat experience, he should have been leading men in the Pacific, pushing toward Japan, fighting the final battles of the war. He had volunteered for combat command 3 times. 3 times he had been denied. The reason sat in his breast pocket, a small oval locket containing a photograph of a 7-year-old girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Sarah Morrison, his daughter, dead at Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. She had been at the Naval Hospital that morning, not as a patient. Sarah had been visiting with her mother, bringing cookies to the wounded sailors. When the bombs fell, chaos had erupted. In the confusion, a piece of shrapnel from a secondary explosion had torn through the hospital wing. Sarah, his bright, laughing, impossible. Sarah had died instantly. The official letter had called her a civilian casualty. The newspapers had called her a victim of Japanese aggression. But Morrison knew what she really was. She was gone. And 4 years later, that wound had not healed. It had scarred over hard and tight, but it had not healed. So when the opportunity came to volunteer for prisoner of war duty at Camp Hearn, Morrison had taken it. Not because he wanted to, because he needed to understand. Needed to see the enemy up close. Needed to know if the hatred he carried was justified or if it would consume him entirely. What he had not expected was to be assigned Japanese prisoners. Camp Hearn housed primarily German and Italian POWs, over 4,000 of them. The Japanese prisoners were rare, uncommon. Most Japanese soldiers chose death over capture. These 24 women were an anomaly. Female Japanese military personnel captured alive. The Pentagon had sent them to Texas for processing, unsure what to do with them. Morrison's orders were simple: house them, feed them, prepare them for eventual repatriation to Japan. Simple orders. But standing here now, looking at these skeletal women who had been left without food or water due to an administrative oversight, Morrison felt the weight of something far more complex. His father's voice echoed in his memory. They had been standing on the ranch outside Houston, watching a wild Mustang that had been caught and corralled. Morrison had been 12 years old. Son, when you catch a wild horse, you got 2 choices. Break it with violence or earn its trust with consistency. Violent way is faster. Trust way builds something that lasts. Young Morrison had asked, what if it is an enemy? His father had looked at him with those steady rancher's eyes. Enemy or not, if you are the one in power, you are the one being judged. Treat them right and you prove who you are. Treat them wrong and you prove they were right about you. Morrison pulled out the locket and opened it. Sarah's face smiled up at him. She had wanted to be a nurse. Even at 7, she had known. She used to bandage her dolls, pretend to give them medicine, sing to them when they were hurt. She would have been 11 now, almost 12. She would have been here probably trying to help, trying to heal. The question was, could he? Could he look at these enemy soldiers and see past his daughter's death? Morrison closed the locket and returned it to his pocket. Then he turned to his second-in-command, First Lieutenant Tom Bradley. Get them food, water, and medical care, immediately. I want a full medical evaluation of all 24 women within the hour. Anyone critically ill gets transported to the base hospital. Bradley, a competent soldier from Dallas, nodded. Yes, sir. Some of the men are asking about security protocols. Morrison glanced at the line of Japanese women. They stood in the sun, swaying slightly with exhaustion, watching the American activity with expressions that mixed fear and confusion. What security protocols? Look at them, Lieutenant. They can barely stand. Post guards at the perimeter if it makes the men feel better, but those women are not going anywhere. Bradley hesitated. Sir Sergeant Thompson has expressed concerns about providing full rations to enemy prisoners. Morrison's jaw tightened. Bill Thompson, Alabama native, good soldier, hard worker, but he carried his own wounds from the Pacific. His entire platoon had been killed at Guadalcanal. Thompson had survived by luck and had been reassigned stateside due to psychological trauma. Tell Sergeant Thompson that Geneva Convention is not optional. We treat prisoners according to international law. Period. Yes, sir. Morrison watched Bradley walk away, then turned his attention back to the women. The medical tent was going up quickly. His medics were efficient. Captain Henry Matthews, the chief medical officer, was already examining the three women who appeared most ill. Morrison's eyes found one woman in particular, the one who had stepped forward to speak. The nurse, Fumiko, she had said her name was. She stood with her arms crossed over her medical bag, watching the American activity with sharp, analytical eyes. Even weakened, even starving, she was assessing, calculating, trying to understand. Morrison recognized that look. He had seen it in the mirror for 4 years. The look of someone trying to make sense of senseless violence. Private James Martinez was going to cook for the enemy. The realization sat in his stomach like a stone as he stood in the camp kitchen, staring at the supplies his commanding officer had ordered him to prepare. Bacon, eggs, bread, coffee, enough for 24 people, 24 Japanese soldiers, 24 enemies. James was 21 years old. He was from Fort Worth, the son of Mexican immigrants who had built a small BBQ restaurant on the north side through decades of hard work. His father grilled brisket, his mother made the sides. His older brother Roberto had worked the register and charmed the customers with his easy smile and quick jokes. Roberto was dead now, 2 months ago. Iwo Jima, a Japanese machine gun nest had torn through his unit. Roberto had died on a beach thousands of miles from the Fort Worth stockyards, bleeding out in volcanic sand while calling for his mother. The telegram had arrived on a Tuesday. James had been working at the restaurant prepping for the lunch rush. His mother had opened the telegram at the register. The sound she made a wail of pure animal grief still echoed in James's nightmares. His father had closed the restaurant for a week. They had held a memorial service. Half of Fort Worth had come. Roberto had been popular, beloved. Everyone had a Roberto story. Everyone had been touched by his warmth. And then James had tried to enlist for combat duty, tried to volunteer for the Pacific Theater, tried to get himself sent to Japan to kill the people who had killed his brother. His commanding officer had denied the request, had seen the rage in James's eyes and known it would get him killed. Instead, James had been assigned to Camp Hearn, kitchen duty, cooking for prisoners of war, usually German prisoners, occasionally Italian, men who seemed almost relieved to be captured, men who ate American food with gratitude and worked on local farms during the day and played soccer in the evening, men who had not killed Roberto, but now Japanese prisoners. Women, yes, but still Japanese, still the enemy, still the people responsible for the telegram that had broken his mother's heart. Captain Morrison's order had been clear. Prepare a full American breakfast, 24 servings, 30 minutes. James looked at the bacon, thick cut, Texas style, maple smoked, the kind his father used in breakfast tacos, the kind Roberto had loved. His hands shook as he lit the stove. Mama had taught him to cook. Feed everyone who comes to your table, she always said. Feed them well. Feed them with love. Food is love made visible. But these were not guests. These were the enemy. James unwrapped the bacon and laid it in the cast iron skillet. The smell rose immediately. Salt and smoke and fat. His stomach growled despite the churning anger. He had not eaten breakfast himself, had been too on edge after receiving Morrison's orders. The bacon began to sizzle. The sound filled the kitchen. Pop and crackle and hiss. James flipped the strips methodically. Golden brown, crispy edges, exactly how his father had taught him. Roberto used to steal bacon from the kitchen, would sneak a strip when he thought no one was looking, burn his fingers on the hot meat, laugh when Mama swatted at him with a towel. His laugh had been infectious. Everyone loved Roberto's laugh. James cracked eggs into a bowl, 24 of them, added butter, black pepper, whisked them together with more force than necessary. The eggs frothed and foamed. He poured them into another skillet. Scrambled eggs, simple, basic. The kind of meal you made when you wanted comfort, when you wanted home. Why was he making comfort food for people who had killed his brother? The bread went into the oven, Texas toast, Thick slices, buttered on both sides. They would come out golden and crispy and perfect. The coffee brewed, strong, American style, the way soldiers liked it, dark and bitter and eye-opening. James moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. His body knew what to do even as his mind rebelled. Flip the bacon, stir the eggs, check the bread, pour the coffee. He plated the food, white ceramic plates, standard military issue. Bacon, eggs, toast, a glass of cold milk. Exactly what an American soldier would receive in the mess hall. Exactly what Roberto should have received in the Pacific, but probably never did. When James had finished, 24 plates sat on the counter. Steam rose from the scrambled eggs. The bacon glistened with fat. The toast was perfectly browned. The milk was cold despite the Texas heat. It looked good. It smelled good. It was the kind of meal that said, welcome, that said, you matter, that said, someone cares about you. James stared at the plates and felt tears burn in his eyes. Roberto had written in his last letter, "Tell Mama I want migas when I get home. Her breakfast tacos with the scrambled eggs and tortilla strips and salsa. Tell her I dream about them." He never got home, and now James was cooking breakfast for the people who made sure Roberto never came home. Captain Morrison appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Time to serve it, Private." James looked at the plates, looked at his captain, looked at his own shaking hands. "Sir, I have to ask, why are we doing this?" Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped into the kitchen and looked at the food James had prepared. "Because it is the right thing to do, Private. Because we are Americans. Because the Geneva Convention requires it. Because if we treat prisoners with cruelty, we are no better than the enemy. Because your mother taught you that food is love, and sometimes love is the hardest thing to give." James felt something crack in his chest. "Sir, they killed my brother." Morrison's eyes met his. There was understanding there, and pain. "I know, they killed my daughter, Pearl Harbor. She was 7 years old." The kitchen fell silent except for the distant sounds of the camp. Morrison continued, "I am not asking you to forgive them, Private. I am asking you to do your duty, to uphold American values even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, because that is what separates us from them. Not our weapons, not our strength, our values." James swallowed hard. "Does it get easier?" Sir Morrison picked up one of the plates, looked at the food, looked at James. "I will let you know when I find out." Together, they carried the trays toward the compound where 24 Japanese women waited starving and terrified for whatever came next. Ko watched the American soldiers approach carrying trays. Her mind could not process what she was seeing. The smell reached her first. Rich, overwhelming, impossible. Food, not rice gruel, not watery soup, not the starvation rations they had received in the Philippines. Real food. The young soldier, the one with dark hair and eyes that looked both angry and heartbroken, set a tray down in front of her. He would not look at her. His jaw was clenched. His hands shook slightly. But the food was there. Ko stared at the plate. Strips of meat crispy and glistening. Yellow mounds of something soft. Thick pieces of toasted bread. A glass of white liquid. Steam rose from it all. Captain Morrison spoke through the translator. "This is bacon, eggs, toast, milk, coffee, standard American military breakfast rations. You will eat. This is not negotiable." Around her, the other women were receiving plates. Everyone was frozen, staring, not quite believing. Sergeant Miko, the hardest of them all, the most suspicious, the most trained to expect cruelty, reached out first. She picked up a strip of the crispy meat. Bacon, the captain had called it. She looked at it, smelled it. Then, with the deliberate movement of someone testing for poison, she took a bite. Her face transformed. Confusion gave way to shock, gave way to something else entirely. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. She chewed slowly, swallowed, closed her eyes. And when she opened them again, she looked at Ko with an expression that held 1,000 questions and no answers. The spell broke. All 24 women reached for their food. They ate slowly at first, carefully, their starved bodies remembering what it meant to be nourished. Then faster. Then, with desperate hunger that had been suppressed by fear, Ko bit into the bacon. The fat melted on her tongue. salt and smoke and sweetness. She had eaten military rations for 3 years. Rice, dried fish, sometimes nothing. This was flavor. This was abundance. This was impossible. Americans did not feed enemies like this. But here was the proof, hot and crispy and undeniably real in her mouth. She looked up and saw the young soldier watching them, the one who had brought the food. His expression was anguished. His hands were clenched into fists. Every muscle in his body was tense. He did not want to be here, Ko realized. Did not want to feed them, was doing it anyway. Wife Fumiko, chewing carefully on toast, managed 2 words in halting English. Thank you. The young soldier flinched as if struck. Then he turned and walked away quickly, his shoulders rigid with tension. Captain Morrison remained. He watched them eat with that same tired, unreadable expression. When Lieutenant Yoshiko looked up at him, he spoke through the translator. There is more if you need it. Drink all the water you can. Captain Matthews will examine anyone who is ill. Tomorrow we will discuss your situation in more detail. Today you eat and rest. He turned to leave, then paused. Welcome to Texas, ladies. You are safe here. And then he was gone, leaving 24 Japanese women sitting in the Texas dust, holding plates of American food, crying as they ate, trying to understand what had just happened and what it meant and whether any of their training had prepared them for this. Ko looked at the bacon in her hand, looked at the milk she had not tasted in years, looked at the American flag flying over the camp. Safe, the captain had said. Ko did not know if she could believe that, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Everything she had been taught about Americans was wrong. And if that was wrong, what else had been a lie? The question terrified her almost as much as the execution she had expected. Because if the propaganda was false, if the enemy was not who she thought, then who was she? What had she been fighting for? What did any of it mean? Ko ate her breakfast and tasted something more complex than bacon and eggs. She tasted the beginning of doubt, the first crack in the wall of certainty that war had built around her mind. And in the distance, in the kitchen, Private James Martinez stood with his back against the wall, his eyes closed, his mother's words echoing in his mind. Feed everyone who comes to your table. Feed them well, feed them with love. He had fed them, despite everything, despite Roberto, despite the rage and grief that lived in his chest like a second heartbeat. He had fed them because Captain Morrison had ordered it, because the Geneva Convention required it, because it was the right thing to do. But mostly, though he would not admit it yet, he had fed them because some part of him, the part his mother had raised, knew they were hungry. And you did not let people starve, not even enemies, not even the people who killed your brother. That was what it meant to be American. That was what it meant to be human. And in that Texas kitchen, in that moment of profound moral confusion, Private James Martinez began to understand something his brother had written in one of his letters. Something Roberto had said about the Japanese soldiers he fought. They are the enemy, but they are also just men far from home. And that is the tragedy. Not that we fight, but that we must fight people who, in another life, might have been friends. The bacon cooled on the counter, the sun climbed higher in the Texas sky, and 24 Japanese women sat in the dust eating American food, beginning the long, difficult journey from enemy to human. The war was ending. Everyone could feel it. Germany had surrendered 3 days ago. Japan was alone now, isolated, defeated in everything but official declaration. But here at Camp Hearn, in this small compound in the Texas Hill Country, a different kind of war was just beginning. Not a war of bullets and bombs, a war of understanding, a war against propaganda and hatred, and the lies that nations tell their soldiers to make killing easier. It was a war that would be won one breakfast at a time. And no one, not the Japanese women who expected death, not the American soldiers who wanted revenge, not Captain Morrison, who carried his daughter's photograph, not Private Martinez, who cooked despite his grief. No one knew yet what victory would look like. They only knew that something had changed, something fundamental and irreversible. The enemy had been given breakfast instead of bullets, and nothing would ever be quite the same. The days that followed transformed Camp Hearn in ways no one had anticipated. The 24 Japanese women given food and water and medical care began to recover their strength. But something else was recovering too. Something more fragile and more powerful than physical health. Their humanity. Day 2 began with another breakfast. Private Martinez prepared the meal with the same conflicted efficiency: bacon, eggs, toast,
Hold still,
coffee.
this will feel
His
cold.
hands no longer
Steady
shook
now,
quite as
almost in.
much, though his
There,
jaw remained
secured.
tight. Captain Morrison supervised his presence, a silent reminder that this was duty, not choice. But after breakfast, something new happened. Captain Henry Matthews, the camp's chief medical officer, set up a proper medical tent. He was 32 years old, a graduate of Baylor Medical School in Dallas, and he had seen more trauma in 3 years of war than most doctors saw in a lifetime. He had patched soldiers on battlefields, performed surgery in mud-filled trenches, and held dying men as they called for mothers who would never hear them. He was good at his job, professional, detached when necessary. But when he walked into the medical tent that morning and found Fumiko Tanaka waiting for him, something in his professional detachment cracked. She stood beside the examination table where one of the sick women lay. Her medical bag was open. Inside, Matthews could see surgical tools, basic instruments but well-maintained, organized with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to use them. Fumiko spoke in careful accented English. "This woman has severe dehydration and dysentery. She needs intravenous fluids, saline solution, also antibiotics if you have them. Sulfanilamide would be best." Matthews stared at her. Then he looked at the sick woman. Fumiko had already begun a preliminary examination. Checked pulse, examined eyes and mouth, palpated the abdomen with practiced hands. "You are a doctor," Matthews said. It was not a question. "Nurse, trained surgeon, Imperial Naval Hospital, Tokyo. 2 years trauma unit." Matthews felt his assumptions shifting. This was not just a prisoner. This was a colleague. Someone who had stood where he had stood, done what he had done, seen what he had seen. He moved to the supply cabinet and pulled out an IV kit. "I need to insert a line." "Can you assist?" Fumiko nodded. She moved with the efficiency of medical training. Cleaned the injection site, found the vein on her first attempt, secured the needle with tape while Matthews connected the saline bag. They worked in silence for several minutes. The sick woman's breathing eased as the fluids began to flow. Matthews checked her vital signs and made notes on a chart. "You are very skilled," he said finally. Fumiko looked at her hands. "You learn quickly in war, or people die." Matthews understood that. He had learned the same way. Trial by fire, mistakes that haunted you, successes you barely had time to celebrate before the next emergency arrived. "Why did you become a doctor?" he asked. Fumiko considered the question. "To save lives, you—" Same reason. The words hung between them. Simple, true, stripped of everything else. Matthews looked at her, really looked at her. Not as an enemy, not as a prisoner, as a fellow physician who had chosen healing in a world committed to destruction. "I have 2 more patients who need examination," he said. "Will you help me?" Fumiko met his eyes. There was a question in her gaze. Permission, uncertainty, fear that this offer might be a trick. Matthews held out a stethoscope. "Colleague to colleague," he said. Fumiko took the stethoscope. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from weakness, from something else, recognition perhaps, or relief. The acknowledgement that her skills, her training, her purpose still mattered even here, even now, even as a prisoner. They spent the next 3 hours working together, examining patients, discussing treatment plans. Matthews taught her about plasma transfusions, a technique the Americans had refined. Fumiko showed him a Japanese herbal compress for nausea that actually worked better than the standard American antiemetics. At one point, Matthews found himself laughing, actually laughing. Fumiko had just described a particularly stubborn admiral who had refused surgery until she threatened to report him to his wife. "They are all the same," Matthews said. "Admirals, generals, politicians, terrible patients." Fumiko smiled. It was the first time Matthews had seen her smile. It transformed her face, made her look younger, made her look like someone who existed outside of war. "Guess that makes us colleagues, not enemies," Matthews said. Fumiko's smile faded. Her eyes grew serious. "I want to believe that," she said quietly, "but I do not know if the world will let us." Matthews had no answer to that, because she was right. The world was not kind to people who saw humanity in enemies. But in this tent for these hours, they were not enemies. They were 2 doctors trying to heal the sick, and that was enough. While Fumiko learned American medical techniques, Ko Yamamoto was learning something else entirely: English. Or rather, she was learning English while Private James Martinez prepared lunch. He had been assigned to teach basic English to the prisoners part of the processing protocol. Most of the American soldiers had refused. Teaching the enemy felt like betrayal. But Captain Morrison had looked at Martinez with those tired, knowing eyes and said, "You are on kitchen duty anyway, Private. Might as well teach while you cook." So here they were, Martinez at the stove, Ko sitting on a stool nearby, watching and listening and trying to form English words around a Japanese tongue. Today, Martinez was preparing something special: Texas barbecue, the kind his father made at the family restaurant, brisket that had been smoking since before dawn. 12 hours over mesquite wood, the bark black and beautiful, the meat tender enough to pull apart with fingers. "This is brisket," Martinez said, gesturing to the meat. "Say it, brisket," Ko tried. Brisket, Martinez almost smiled. Close enough. He pulled the brisket from the smoker. The smell filled the kitchen. Smoke and fat and slow-cooked perfection. Ko's stomach growled audibly. Martinez heard it and his expression flickered. Something between sympathy and that ever-present anger. He began slicing. Each cut revealed the pink smoke ring beneath the bark. The juice ran onto the cutting board. Martinez worked with practiced precision. Thin slices. Against the grain. The way his father had taught him. "In Hokkaido, we have Genghis Khan Ko," offered in halting English. "Lamb barbecue." "Very good." Martinez paused. "Lamb. We got lamb too in Texas. Texas has everything." Your home, Ko ventured carefully. "Is it beautiful?" The question hung in the air. Martinez's knife stopped moving. He stared at the brisket. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Yeah, Fort Worth, stockyards, cattle, barbecue joints on every corner. My family's restaurant, best barbacoa in North Texas." So heard something in his voice. The same thing she heard in her own voice when she talked about Hokkaido. Homesickness. The ache of distance. "You miss home," Martinez looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment all the anger seemed to drain away, replaced by simple exhaustion. "Every damn day. Me too." The admission settled between them like a fragile bridge. Two people who wanted to be anywhere but here, who wanted to be home with family and familiar things and lives that made sense. Martinez returned to slicing. Ko watched his hands. They moved with the same precision Fumiko used in surgery, the same care her father used when planting rice. Universal human precision, the desire to do something well. Martinez prepared the full spread. Brisket. Ribs with dry rub, the meat falling off the bone. Pinto beans cooked ranch style with bacon and molasses. Coleslaw vinegar-based and tangy. Cornbread sweet and golden butter melting into it. And sweet tea. Very sweet, Southern style. He explained each dish as he worked. Ko practiced the English words. Tried to understand the flavors just from description. Martinez found himself explaining more than necessary. Talking about his father's restaurant, his mother's sides, the way Fort Worth smelled on Saturday mornings when every barbecue place fired up their smokers. Your brother Ko said carefully. She had heard the soldiers talking, had pieced together enough English to understand. He liked this food. Martinez's hands froze, his whole body went rigid. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly he answered. Roberto loved it. Used to say he dreamed about it in the Pacific. Said when he came home he wanted Mama's breakfast tacos. Migas with the scrambled eggs and tortilla strips and salsa. Martinez's voice cracked. He never got to come home. Ko felt tears burn in her eyes. "I am sorry. War is a terrible thing." Martinez looked at her. His eyes were red. His jaw was clenched. She could see the battle happening behind his face. The anger, the grief, the desperate need to blame anyone for the hole Roberto's death had left in the world. But when he spoke, his voice was softer. "Yeah, it is." He plated the food, put a generous serving in front of company. The brisket steamed, the beans bubbled, the cornbread was perfect. "Eat," he said. "Tell me if Texas barbecue is better than your Genghis Khan." Ko picked up a piece of brisket, bit into it. The flavors exploded. Smoke, salt, the sweetness of fat, the tang of the rub. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, Martinez was watching her with something like hope. Is very good, she said. But Genghis Khan also very good. Maybe they are same. Different but same. Martinez understood what she meant. Different countries, different flavors, but the same human need for comfort food, for home, for love made edible. Maybe, he said. And in that kitchen, over Texas barbecue, a Mexican-American soldier and a Japanese clerk found something unexpected. Not friendship, not yet, but the possibility of it. The recognition that they were both just people far from home, missing what they had lost trying to survive. It was a small thing, a tiny crack in the wall of hatred war had built. But it was something. Not everyone at Camp Hearn was experiencing transformation. Sergeant Billis Thompson stood in the shadows beyond the mess hall, watching the Japanese women eat lunch, watching them smile, watching them talk with American soldiers as if this were normal, as if they had not killed thousands of American boys. His hands clenched into fists. His jaw ached from grinding his teeth. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. Thompson was 38 years old, from Alabama. He had been a good soldier once, a leader. His men had trusted him, followed him, died for him. We knew of them, every single one. Guadalcanal. The jungle had been hell. Hot, wet, full of mosquitoes and disease and an enemy that fought with fanatical determination. Thompson's platoon had been ambushed. Japanese soldiers had poured out of the jungle, screaming, firing, throwing grenades. The battle had been chaos, noise, blood, death. Thompson had survived by luck, by being in the wrong place at the right time, or maybe the right place at the wrong time. He could never decide which. His men had screamed as they died, called for medics, called for mothers, called for God, and Thompson had been unable to save any of them. The Army had sent him stateside, given him a medical discharge for psychological trauma, but he had fought it, demanded to stay in service. They had compromised. Stateside duty, Camp Hearn, guarding prisoners who could not fight back. It should have been easy. Germans and Italians mostly. They were practically happy to be captured. Away from the war, safe, fed. Some of them even worked on local Texas farms during the day, helping with the labor shortage. Thompson had hated it, but he had understood it. Geneva Convention, international law, all that. But Japanese prisoners, women soldiers eating American food, learning English, being treated like guests instead of enemies. This was betrayal. This was dishonor to every American boy who had died fighting them. Thompson had tried to voice his concerns to Captain Morrison, had been shut down, told that orders were orders, that the Geneva Convention did not have exceptions for personal feelings. So Thompson had decided to take matters into his own hands. It was midnight when he slipped into the kitchen. The camp was quiet, guards were on patrol, but Thompson knew their patterns, knew where the blind spots were. The kitchen was dark. Thompson used a small flashlight, found the milk storage. The milk was delivered fresh every morning from a local dairy, kept cold in the icebox. Enough for all the prisoners and the American personnel. Thompson pulled out the bottles, opened them, poured out half the contents, then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bottle of laxative. Medical grade. Strong. He had taken it from the dispensary earlier. He poured it into the milk, resealed the bottles, put them back in the icebox. It would not kill them, just make them sick. Just remind them that they were prisoners, not guests, that they did not deserve American generosity. Next, the water barrel, the large barrel that supplied drinking water to the prisoner compound. Thompson opened the valve and let some water drain out. Then he added more laxative, enough to affect anyone who drank it. He was closing the valve when he heard a sound behind him. A lighter clicking, striking, the small flame illuminating a face. Private Martinez stood in the doorway. He had been smoking outside, watching the stars, thinking about Roberto. And he had seen Thompson enter the kitchen. Martinez's eyes went to the water barrel, to Thompson's hands, to the small medical bottle Thompson was trying to hide. The two men stared at each other. "What are you doing?" Sergeant Martinez asked. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Thompson straightened. He was older, higher rank. He had seniority. But in that moment, standing in the dark kitchen with evidence of sabotage literally in his hands, he felt like a caught child. I am doing what should have been done from the start, Thompson said. I am reminding these prisoners that they are enemies, not friends. By poisoning their food, Martinez's voice was harder now. By making them sick, they do not deserve to be comfortable. Private, they killed our boys. They killed your brother. My entire platoon died at Guadalcanal. Every man. And now we are feeding them barbecue, teaching them English. This is wrong. Martinez took a step forward. His cigarette dangled from his lips, the ember glowing red. You think I do not know they killed Roberto? You think I do not wake up every morning wanting revenge? But Captain Morrison gave orders. Geneva Convention requires us to treat prisoners humanely. We are Americans. We follow the law. Thompson's anger flared. The law. The law did not save my men. The law did not stop the Japanese from torturing prisoners at Bataan, from executing surrendered soldiers, from fighting to the last man on every island. They do not follow the law. Why should we? Because we are better than them, Martinez said simply. The words hit Thompson like a physical blow. He staggered back against the counter. Better? How does being better bring back the dead? How does it honor the men who died? Martinez flicked his cigarette into the sink, stepped closer. His eyes were hard but not cruel. My mama taught me that you honor the dead by living well, by being the kind of person they would be proud of. Roberto would not want me to poison prisoners. He would want me to be better, to prove that America stands for something. You do not understand, Thompson said. His voice was breaking. You did not see what I saw. You did not watch your entire platoon die screaming. You did not hold men while they bled out calling for mothers who would never hear them. You do not know. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke softly. You are right. I do not know that. But I know my brother died fighting for American values. Freedom, justice, honor. If we betray those values because we are angry, then Roberto died for nothing. Thompson felt something crack inside him. The wall he had built around his grief, the anger that had kept him functional, it all came crashing down. He slumped against the counter. His shoulders shook. He was crying and he could not stop. They died screaming, he said through sobs. My boys, they died screaming for water. And we are giving these people milk. Cold milk, good food, comfortable beds. It is not fair. It is not right. Martinez did not approach, did not touch him. Just stood there bearing witness to Thompson's breakdown. No, Martinez said eventually. It is not fair. War is not fair. Death is not fair. But making prisoners sick does not honor your men. It just makes us cruel. And we are better than that, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Thompson wiped his face, looked at the young private, saw something in Martinez's eyes that he recognized. Grief, fresh and raw. Martinez was carrying his own dead brother, his own rage, his own need for revenge. But he was choosing something else, something harder. Thompson looked at the water barrel, at the milk in the icebox, at the evidence of his sabotage. What are you going to do, he asked. Martinez pulled out a pack of cigarettes, offered one to Thompson. Thompson took it with shaking hands. Martinez lit both cigarettes. They smoked in silence for a moment. I'm going to dump this milk, Martinez said finally. Refill the water barrel, and you are going to help me. Then we are going to report to Captain Morrison in the morning. Tell him what happened. Face whatever consequences come. Court-Martial Thompson said. Probably, Martinez agreed. They worked together in silence. Dumped the contaminated milk, scrubbed the containers, refilled the water barrel with clean water, removed all evidence of the sabotage attempt. When they were finished, Thompson looked at Martinez. Your brother would be proud of you, he said. Martinez's eyes glistened. Maybe. I hope so. They walked out of the kitchen together, into the Texas night, toward whatever morning would bring. Behind them, the kitchen was clean. The food was safe, and two soldiers who had wanted revenge had chosen something harder, something better. They had chosen to be American. 3 days later, a storm rolled across the Texas hill country. Coe stood under the eaves of a supply building, watching the rain pour down. It was late afternoon. The sky had turned dark gray. Lightning flashed in the distance. Thunder rumbled like artillery. She was not alone. three American soldiers had taken shelter in the same spot. Danny Hayes, 19, from Amarillo. Jack Morrison, no relation to the captain, 23, from Lubbock. And Private Martinez, who nodded at her but said nothing. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. The rain created a wall of sound, loud enough that conversation required raised voices, private enough that no one could overhear. Jack pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Offered them around. Danny took one. Martinez took one. After a moment's hesitation, Jack offered the pack to Cone. She took one. She had not smoked in weeks, not since before capture. But right now, standing in the rain with three American soldiers, it felt like the right thing to do. Jack lit all four cigarettes with a battered Zippo lighter. They smoked in silence, watching the rain. "Well," Jack said finally, "this is something. Never thought I would be smoking with the enemy." Co looked at him. Her English was improving. She understood most of what he said now. "I was clerk," she said carefully. "File papers. Never shoot anyone." Danny laughed, not cruelly, just surprised. "I worked at a drugstore. Soda fountain. Never shot anyone either until last year." The admission hung in the air. Danny was a killer now, had been forced to become one. Just like all of them had been forced to become things they never wanted to be. Martinez spoke quietly. "My brother loved rain," said it reminded him of Texas. Co looked at him. The pain in his voice was obvious even through the language barrier. "Your brother," she said carefully. "Is he gone?" Martinez nodded. "Iwo Jima. 2 months ago." Co felt her throat tighten. "I am sorry. War is a terrible thing. My brother also soldier. In Okinawa. I do not know if he alive." They looked at each other. Two people who had lost brothers to the same war. Who might have in another life been friends. Who might have shared cigarettes and complained about rain and talked about home. But instead they were here. On opposite sides of history. Jack spoke again. "My dad always said wars are fought by old men who send young men to die for things that do not matter. Never understood what he meant until I got here." Danny nodded. "My grandpa fought in the Great War. Said the worst part was not the fighting, was realizing the Germans were just like us, just boys who wanted to go home. Said that knowledge made killing them harder, made surviving them harder too." Co listened, tried to understand. These were American soldiers, the enemy, the monsters from propaganda. But they were talking about killing as a burden, about survival as something complicated, about the enemy as human. It was everything she had been taught was wrong about Americans. And it was clearly true. The rain continued to pour. Lightning flashed closer now. Thunder cracked loud enough to make them all flinch. Martinez offered his cigarette to Cone. She took it, took a drag, passed it back. A universal soldier gesture. Sharing in scarcity, sharing in experience. "In another life," Jack said quietly, "maybe we could have been friends." Co felt tears mixed with rain on her face. In another life. Maybe. But in this life, they were enemy soldiers sheltering from the same storm. And that had to be enough. The cigarette burned down. The rain began to ease. Eventually, the soldiers left, heading back to their duties. Co remained for a moment longer, watching the water drip from the eaves. Something had changed, something she could not name yet. But it was there. The wall between enemy and human was crumbling, one cigarette at a time. That evening, Captain Morrison called an assembly. All 24 Japanese women gathered in the compound's central area. American soldiers stood at the perimeter. The sun was setting, turning the Texas sky orange and purple. Morrison stood on a small platform. His face was serious. He spoke clearly, and the translator conveyed his words. "Ladies, I have an announcement. Germany has surrendered. The war with Japan continues, but intelligence suggests it cannot last much longer. You will be processed for eventual repatriation. The timeline remains uncertain, but we estimate 3 to 6 months. Within 2 weeks, you will be processed through Manila and repatriated to Japan. You are going home." The words should have brought joy, relief, celebration. Instead, they brought silence. Co looked at the other women, saw confusion, fear, uncertainty. Lieutenant Yoshiko finally spoke. "Home to what? Defeat, shame. How do we face our families?" Fumiko's voice was quiet. "I learned to respect Americans. Does that make me traitor?" Yuki, the youngest, said what they were all thinking. "I do not want to leave. Is that wrong?" Morrison listened to the translator relay their concerns. His expression softened. Going home is always complicated, he said, especially after war. You will face difficult questions. People will judge you. But you survived. That is what matters. You survived and you learned something. Take that lesson back with you. Share it. Maybe someday it will matter. Ko felt tears on her cheeks. She had wanted to go home for so long, had dreamed of Hokkaido, of her family's farm, of rice fields and cool air and familiar language. But now she wondered what she would find there. Would her family understand? Would they see her as a survivor or as someone who had dishonored herself by being captured, by eating American food, by learning English, by seeing humanity in enemies? As the assembly dismissed, Ko noticed a car pulling up at the main gate. Official looking, military but different somehow. A woman emerged, tall, older, wearing a Women's Army Corps uniform with colonel insignia. Captain Morrison walked toward the gate to meet her. The soldiers watched curiously. Private Hayes leaned toward Martinez. "Who is that?" Martinez shook his head. "No idea." But something in the colonel's bearing, in the way Morrison straightened as she approached, suggested this was not a routine visit. This was something important. Ko watched the colonel scan the compound, watched her eyes settle on the Japanese women, watched her nod to Morrison and begin walking toward them. Whatever was about to happen, Ko knew it would change things again. Everything kept changing. Every day brought new revelations, new cracks in old certainties. She had come to Texas expecting death, had received breakfast instead, had expected cruelty, had found unexpected kindness, had expected monsters, had found humans. What would she find next? Colonel stopped in front of the assembled women. She looked at each face carefully. Then she spoke to Morrison, who spoke to the translator who conveyed her words. "I am Colonel Patricia Henderson. I am here from Washington. I need to speak with all of you about your experiences, about what happened here at Camp Hearn." Ko's heart raced. Was this it, the punishment they had been expecting? The revelation that all this kindness had been a trick? Henderson continued, "Your testimony matters. We are documenting how America treats prisoners of war, not for propaganda, for history, for truth." She paused. Let her words settle. "Because what happened here, what Captain Morrison and his men did, what you experienced, this is important. This is what America should be, and the world needs to know." Ko looked at Fumiko, at Yoshiko, at Yuki, saw her own confusion reflected in their faces. They had expected death and received breakfast, expected hatred and received hesitant kindness, expected to be forgotten and were now being told their story mattered. None of it made sense. All of it was true. And as the sun set over Camp Hearn, turning the barbed wire fence into gilded lines against the purple Texas sky, 24 Japanese women began to understand something profound. They had not just survived the war. They had survived into something new, something unprecedented, a moment where enemies had been given the chance to become human again. Whether that chance would last, whether it would spread, whether it would matter, remained to be seen. But for now, in this moment, it was real. And that was enough. Colonel Patricia Henderson sat across from Ko Yamamoto in a small interview room. The space was simple: 2 chairs, a table, a pitcher of water, and 2 glasses. Through the window, the Texas sun blazed in a cloudless sky. Henderson was 45 years old. She had kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had seen enough of war to know its cost. She worked for the Pentagon's Women's Reintegration Program, documenting the experiences of female military personnel on all sides of the conflict. Her mission was not propaganda, it was truth. Miss Yamamoto Henderson began, and the translator conveyed her words. "I need to ask you some questions. You do not have to answer. But if you do, your testimony will be recorded for historical purposes. Do you consent?" Ko nodded, "Yes." Henderson opened a notebook. "What was your expectation when you arrived at Camp Hearn?" Ko took a breath. The memory was still fresh, still raw. "I expected execution. We all did. We were taught Americans would torture us, kill us. We prayed for quick death. And what actually happened," Ko felt tears prick at her eyes. "They brought us breakfast, real food. Captain Morrison said we were under American protection. I could not understand. What surprised you most about the Americans?" Ko considered the question carefully. "That they are human, that they follow rules even when angry, that they showed kindness to enemies. Everything we were taught was lie. Henderson made notes. Then she asked the harder question. How do you feel about returning to Japan, about facing your family and community after what you have experienced here? Ko's hands trembled. I am afraid. I learned to respect Americans. I learned our propaganda was false. How do I tell my family that? How do I live in Japan
Hold
knowing what I
still,
know
this will
now?
feel cold.
Henderson
Steady
leaned
now,
forward.
almost
Her
in.
voice was
There,
gentle.
it's secured.
What you learned here is valuable, Miss Yamamoto. It is proof that humanity can survive even in war, even between enemies. That lesson is worth carrying home, even if it is difficult. She interviewed all 24 women over 2 days. Each story was similar. Each carried the same themes. Fear transformed into confusion. Confusion transformed into understanding. Understanding that complicated everything they thought they knew about enemies and honor and war. Fumiko Tanaka spoke of working alongside Captain Matthews, of learning that medicine had no nationality, that the oath to heal transcended flags and uniforms. Lieutenant Yoshiko Sato spoke of Captain Morrison's leadership, of how he enforced protocol not through cruelty but through consistency, of how American military discipline was about values, not just obedience. Private Yuki Nakamura, the youngest, spoke of simple kindness, of soldiers who taught her card tricks and shared cigarettes and treated her like a younger sister instead of an enemy. Sergeant Micho spoke the least, but what she said carried weight. My own officers abandoned us. Americans saved us. I do not know how to reconcile that. I do not know what honor means anymore. Henderson recorded it all, every word, every testimony. When she was finished, she met with Captain Morrison privately. What you did here matters, she told him. Not just for these women, for America. You prove that our values are not just words, they are actions. Even when those actions are difficult, especially then. Morrison looked tired. I did what the Geneva Convention required, what my conscience demanded, what my daughter would have wanted. Your daughter Morrison pulled out the locket, showed Henderson the photograph of Sarah, told her the story. Pearl Harbor, a 7-year-old girl who wanted to be a nurse, who died treating wounded soldiers enemy and ally alike. She understood something I am still learning, Morrison said quietly, that the enemy is only enemy until you see their humanity. These women came here expecting monsters. I had to prove them wrong. Not for them, for Sarah, for what she would have wanted. Henderson closed her notebook. Captain Morrison, I am going to recommend you for commendation. What you did here, the leadership you showed, it represents the best of what America can be. Morrison shook his head. I do not need commendation, Colonel. I just need to know that these women will be safe when they go home, that they will not be punished for surviving. Henderson could not promise that. They both knew it. The world was not kind to prisoners of war, especially not in Japan, where capture was considered the ultimate dishonor. But she could promise to document their story, to preserve it, to ensure that someone somewhere would know what happened at Camp Hearn in May 1945, that someone would know that breakfast changed everything. 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The women were processed for repatriation, medical examinations, paperwork, interviews. The machinery of military bureaucracy grinding slowly toward their departure. But Morrison insisted on one final gathering, one last meal, a proper goodbye. He organized it for their final evening at Camp Hearn, a Texas-style cookout in the compound's central yard. He assigned Private Martinez to prepare the food, the best food, the kind of meal you serve to honored guests, not prisoners. Martinez worked all day. He prepared brisket that had been smoking since dawn. 16 hours over mesquite wood, the bark thick and black and beautiful. The meat so tender it fell apart at the touch. He prepared ribs with his father's dry rub recipe, brown sugar, paprika, chili powder, black pepper, garlic. The ribs were glossy and sticky and perfect. He made pinto beans ranch style, slow cooked with bacon and molasses and onions, made coleslaw tangy and crisp, made cornbread from his mother's recipe sweet and golden with butter melting into every piece, made potato salad Texas style with mustard and pickles and hard-boiled eggs. And his mother, when she heard what the meal was for, sent something special. 3 pecan pies, made that morning in Fort Worth, driven to camp by Martinez's father himself. When Martinez's father arrived with the pies, he found his son in the kitchen basting ribs. They looked at each other, Neither had spoken much since Roberto's death. Grief had made them strangers. Your mother wanted you to have these, his father said, setting down the pie boxes. Said you were doing something important. Martinez wiped his hands on his apron. Just following orders, Papa. His father looked at the spread Martinez was preparing, at the care evident in every dish, at the love baked into the food, despite everything. Your brother would be proud of you, his father said quietly. You are choosing to be better. That takes strength, Roberto would understand. Martinez felt his throat tighten. I think about him every day. Wonder if I am betraying him by cooking for them. His father put a hand on Martinez's shoulder. You honor him by being the man he believed you could be, by following your mother's teaching, by feeding people with love even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. That is what makes us human, mijo. Not the hate, the love. They embraced, brief, tight. Two men trying to hold on to something in a world that kept taking everything away. When his father left, Martinez returned to the food. But something had shifted. The anger that had fueled him for 2 months had not disappeared, but it had transformed, become something else, something that looked almost like peace. As sunset approached, soldiers set up tables in the compound yard, strung lights overhead. Someone produced a record player, Western swing music, Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, the fiddle and steel guitar filling the air with sound that was distinctly unmistakably Texan. The Japanese women emerged from their barracks wearing clean uniforms that had been provided for their journey home. They looked healthier than they had 2 weeks ago. Fumiko no longer had the hollowness in her cheeks. Yuki's eyes were brighter. Even Sergeant Micho stood straighter, stronger. But they also looked uncertain. This gathering felt significant, felt final, felt like the end of something they had not expected to feel sad about losing. The American soldiers arrived. Martinez and his kitchen crew brought out the food, platter after platter. The smell was overwhelming, smoke and fat and sweetness and tang. A symphony of Texas barbecue. Captain Morrison stood at the head of the main table. He surveyed the gathering, Japanese women and American soldiers, former enemies about to share a meal, about to say goodbye. He raised his hand. The conversations quieted, the music lowered. Everyone turned to face him. Ladies, Morrison began. The translator stood ready. In 2 days you will board a ship bound for Manila and then Japan. You will return to a homeland that has been defeated, that has surrendered. You will face difficult questions. People will judge you for surviving, for being captured, for learning to see Americans as human. He paused. Let the weight of those words settle. I want you to understand something. What happened here was not charity. It was not even kindness, really. It was us being who we are supposed to be. Americans treat prisoners of war according to the rules because that is who we are. Not because you earned it, because we value human dignity, even in war, especially in war. Morrison's voice grew stronger. You deserve this treatment because you are human beings. Not because you stopped being Japanese. Not because you became American. Because you are human. And humanity transcends nationality. When people tell you Americans are monsters, remember the breakfast we brought you. Remember Captain Matthews treating your sick. Remember Private Martinez teaching you English over barbecue. Remember Corporal Hayes making you laugh with card tricks. Remember that we saw you, not as enemies, but as people. The women listened in silence. Some were crying. Ko clutched Fumiko's hand. Morrison continued, and I want you to know that you taught us something too. You taught us that the enemy is only enemy until you break bread with them. That hatred is learned and can be unlearned. That our values mean nothing if we only apply them to people who look like us, or think like us, or fight on our side. He looked at each face. Japanese and American, young and old, enemy and friend and everything in between. So thank you for surviving, for giving us the chance to prove ourselves, for showing us that peace is possible even after war. Take that lesson home. Share it. Maybe someday it will matter. The silence that followed was profound. Then Lieutenant Yoshiko stood. She bowed deeply, the Japanese bow of deepest respect. Around her, all 24 women stood and bowed together. When they straightened, Yoshiko spoke in English, halting but clear. Thank you for treating us like human, for showing us America is not monster from propaganda. We will remember. Always. Morrison nodded. The moment hung suspended. Then someone started the music again. The spell broke. Soldiers and prisoners moved toward the food. Martinez served the brisket himself, sliced it thin, placed it on plates with beans and coleslaw and cornbread, watched as the women tasted Texas barbecue one last time. Co approached him. Her plate was full. Her eyes were bright with tears. "Thank you," she said in careful English, "for teaching me, for cooking with love, even when hurt." Martinez felt his own eyes burning. "You are welcome. And I am sorry. About before. About the anger. You lost brother. Anger is natural, but you chose kindness. That is strength." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. On it, she had written something in both Japanese and English. "This is my family address in Hokkaido," she said. "If war ends and world is better, maybe you visit. I cook Genghis Khan for you. You teach me more barbecue." Martinez took the paper. His hands were shaking. "Maybe I will. Maybe when things are different." They looked at each other. Two people who had lost brothers to the same war, who had found something unexpected in a Texas prisoner camp. Not friendship exactly, but the possibility of it. The recognition that in another world, another time, they could have been friends. Captain Matthews found Fumiko near the medical tent. She was looking at the equipment, at the space where they had worked together. "Miss Tanaka," he said, "I wanted to give you something." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation, typed on official military stationery, sealed and signed. "This is a recommendation for medical school, for any program in Japan or America. It documents your skills, your training, your dedication. If you want to continue healing people, this will help." Fumiko took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why you do this? Because you are a good doctor. Because the world needs people who have seen the worst and still chose compassion. Because medicine should not have borders." Matthews extended his hand, Western style. Fumiko hesitated, then shook it. "Keep healing," he said. "That is how we win. Not with weapons, with care." In another part of the gathering, Sergeant Thompson approached Private Yuki. He had been avoiding the Japanese women since his confrontation with Martinez, had been confined to quarters and was facing court-martial. But Morrison had allowed him to attend this final gathering. Thompson held a photograph. His hand shook as he offered it to Yuki. "This is my daughter," he said through the translator. "Sarah. She would be your age. She died at Pearl Harbor, and I almost became a monster because of it. Almost hurt you to hurt her memory." Yuki looked at the photograph, a young girl with bright eyes and a hopeful smile. Thompson continued, his voice breaking. "You remind me of her, and I realized that if Sarah were alive, if she had been captured, I would want the enemy to treat her with kindness, with humanity. So I am giving you this, to remember that Americans can be better than I was, that we can choose compassion even when it hurts." Yuki took the photograph carefully, like it was made of glass. "I am sorry for your daughter. I am sorry for all daughters lost in war. I will keep this. I will remember that hate can become compassion." Thompson nodded, could not speak, could only nod and step away before he broke down completely. As darkness fell, the light strung overhead cast a warm glow. Someone taught the Japanese women to two-step dance. Awkward at first, then with more confidence. Laughter filled the air. Real laughter. The kind that comes when people stop being enemies and start being human. Martinez brought out the pecan pies, cut them into generous slices. The women had never tasted pecan pie. The sweetness, the richness, the buttery crust and caramelized pecans. It was revelation. Co closed her eyes as she ate. When she opened them, Martinez was watching. "Texas is delicious," she said. Martinez laughed. First time he had really laughed since Roberto died. "Yeah, it really is." The party continued into the night. Stories were shared, addresses exchanged, promises made to write, though everyone knew most would never be kept. The world was too broken, the distance too vast. But in that moment, in that Texas night under stars that looked the same in Japan and America, the promises felt real. And that was enough. The women departed 2 days later. Early morning, the buses came to take them to the train station. From there to California. Then ships to Manila. then home to a Japan that had surrendered and would never be the same. Ko was the last to board the bus. She turned at the door, looked back at Camp Hearn, at the barbed wire fence that had held her prisoner, at the buildings where she had expected to die, at the Americans who had given her life instead. Captain Morrison stood at attention. Beside him, Private Martinez, Captain Matthews, Sergeant Thompson awaiting court-martial, but granted permission to say goodbye, Corporal Hayes, all the soldiers who had shown her that enemies could become human. Ko raised her hand. Western-style wave. Morrison returned it. A small gesture, but it carried weight. Then she boarded the bus. The door closed, the engine started, and 24 Japanese women left Texas carrying a story no one would quite believe. But it was true. All of it. The breakfast, the barbecue, the kindness, the transformation. The proof that humanity could survive even the worst that war could offer. It was true, and it would echo forward through time in ways none of them could imagine. Years passed. The war ended. The world rebuilt itself slowly, painfully. Japan transformed from enemy to ally. America transformed from warrior to peacemaker, though imperfectly, incompletely. And the women of Camp Hearn carried their lessons into new lives. 1948, Tokyo. Fumiko Tanaka opened a clinic for trauma survivors. She used Captain Matthews' letter of recommendation to gain accreditation. Her clinic treated veterans, both Japanese and American. She made no distinction. Trauma was trauma. Healing was healing. On her desk, she kept a photograph. The medical staff of Camp Hearn. Matthews had sent it to her with a note. Still saving lives, I hope. The world needs your gifts. She did. The clinic grew, became a model for trauma treatment. Fumiko trained other doctors in her methods. Methods that recognized that war wounded everyone, that healing required seeing the human beneath the soldier. 1952, Fort Worth, Texas. Ko Yamamoto stepped off a bus in the Stockyards district. She carried one suitcase and an envelope full of carefully saved money. She had worked in Japan for 7 years, saved every yen, applied for a student visa. Come to America to study culinary arts and to find Private Martinez. His family restaurant was not hard to locate. Everyone in the Stockyards knew Martinez BBQ. Ko stood outside for 10 minutes gathering courage. Then she pushed open the door. The smell hit her immediately. Brisket, mesquite smoke, exactly as she remembered. Martinez stood at the counter. He had filled out some, lost the haunted look he had carried in 1945. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, he did not recognize her. Then his eyes widened. Miss Yamamoto Ko smiled. I promised to visit, to learn more barbecue. Martinez laughed, that same real laugh she had heard once at Camp Hearn. He came around the counter, shook her hand, then impulsively hugged her. Welcome to Texas. Really welcome this time. Ko worked at the restaurant while studying. She learned American cooking, taught Japanese techniques. Martinez's mother adored her, taught her family recipes, learned Ko's Hokkaido dishes in return. By 1955, Ko was a partner in the restaurant. By 1960, they had added a Japanese fusion menu. By 1965, Martinez BBQ was famous across Texas for its unique blend of flavors, American and Japanese, smoke and umami. Two cuisines that had been enemies, now creating something entirely new. 1965, San Francisco. Fumiko's trauma clinic opened an American branch. She worked with the Veterans Administration, treated American soldiers returning from Korea and now Vietnam, treated them with the same care Captain Matthews had shown her 20 years earlier. At the opening ceremony Matthews attended, he was older now, gray-haired, but his eyes were the same. Kind, professional, dedicated. They shook hands, then embraced. Still saving lives, he said. Still learning from the best, she replied. 1970, Camp Hearn, Texas. Lieutenant Yoshiko Sato returned for the dedication of a historical marker. She was 55 now. Her husband had survived the war. They had rebuilt their spine in Japan. She had worked in U.S.-Japan cultural relations, had spent 25 years building bridges between former enemies. Her daughter accompanied her, 25 years old, beautiful, confident, working for the American Embassy in Tokyo. Captain Morrison attended the ceremony. He was 63, retired, living on his family ranch outside Houston. But when he received the invitation, he knew he had to come. Yoshiko and Morrison stood before the historical marker together. It read Camp Hearn, POW Camp 1943 to 1945, where enemies became human, simple words, but they contained multitudes. Captain Morrison, Yoshiko said. Her English was perfect now. You saved my life. Morrison shook his head. Ma'am, you saved mine too. You reminded me why we fight. Not to destroy, but to preserve humanity. They embraced. Two old soldiers who had found peace. 1975. Tokyo Historical Society. Private Yuki Nakamura, now Yuki Tanaka teacher and historian, gave a lecture to university students. She was 49. She had spent 30 years teaching. Her specialty was World War II history, particularly the stories that did not fit the simple narratives. She stood before a classroom of young Japanese students and told them about Camp Hearn, about expecting death and receiving breakfast, about American soldiers who followed rules even when angry, about Captain Morrison and Private Martinez and the lesson they taught. Always seek truth, she told her students. Propaganda creates enemies. Truth creates understanding. The Americans I met were not monsters. They were humans trying to be better. Learn from that. She still kept Sergeant Thompson's daughter's photograph, showed it to her students as evidence that hate could transform into compassion, that even those most broken by war could choose healing. The lecture was recorded, transcribed, published. It became required reading in Japanese schools. A counter-narrative to the simple story of villains and heroes, because the truth was never simple. It was complex, painful, beautiful, human. 1985. Austin, Texas. The University of Texas acquired a collection of World War II documents, among them the personal papers of Captain Robert Morrison. His daughter from his second marriage donated them after his death. The archivist opening the boxes found journals, letters, photographs, and one entry that made her call her supervisor immediately. The entry was dated May 9, 1945, written in Morrison's neat, controlled handwriting. Today I fed the enemy. 24 Japanese women who expected execution. I gave them bacon and eggs instead. Some of my men asked why. I told them it is protocol, but that is not the whole truth. The truth is Sarah. She died at Pearl Harbor treating wounded Japanese pilots. Enemy pilots. The hospital staff said she did not discriminate. She treated anyone who bled. She was 7 years old and she understood something I am only learning now. The enemy is enemy only until you see their humanity. These women prayed for death. I gave them breakfast. Maybe that is the most American thing I have ever done. Maybe that is what Sarah would have wanted. Maybe that is how we win. Not by destroying enemies, but by proving we are better than their propaganda said we were. Tomorrow I will teach them English. Next week I will help them go home. And maybe someday they will remember that Americans chose mercy when they could have chosen revenge. That is the legacy I want. That is the America I want Sarah to be proud of. The archivist made copies, sent them to the Japanese women mentioned in the journals. Most were elderly now, some had passed, but those who received the letter wept because they had carried that memory for 40 years, had wondered if it mattered, if anyone would remember, if the lesson would survive. And here was proof. Morrison had carried it too, had made it his life's mission to prove that compassion was strength, not weakness. The legacy lived. Present day, 2024, Fort Worth, Texas, James Martinez. The third stood in his family's restaurant. He was 28 years old, fourth generation. The restaurant had expanded, 3 locations now. But the original Stockyards location remained the heart. On the wall hung photographs, black and white images from 1945. His great-grandfather, Private James Martinez in uniform, standing beside Japanese women in a prisoner camp, smiling, really smiling. Below that, a color photograph from 1960. His great-grandfather and Ko Yamamoto in the restaurant kitchen, both wearing aprons, both covered in barbecue sauce, both laughing. The menu featured original items, Martinez family brisket, traditional Texas ribs, but also Ko's Japanese fusion items, miso-glazed ribs, shoyu marinated brisket, wasabi coleslaw, East meets West, former enemies creating something beautiful together. A family entered the restaurant, Japanese Americans, 3 generations, grandmother, parents, 2 young children. The grandmother approached the counter. She was about 60. She looked at the photographs. At young James Martinez. My grandmother was Ko Yamamoto, she said. She worked here, helped build this place. James Martinez III smiled. I know. Your grandmother was a legend in our family, changed everything, taught my great-grandfather that enemies could become friends. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She never talked much about the war, but she talked about this place, about your family, about the breakfast that changed her life. James gestured to a table, the best table, the one by the window. Please sit, eat. It is on the house, family does not pay. They sat. James brought out the food, brisket that had been smoking since dawn. The recipe unchanged since 1945. Ribs with Kyo's fusion glaze. The perfect blend of Texas and Japan. Cornbread, coleslaw, pecan pie. The family ate, tears mixed with laughter. The children asked questions. The grandmother told stories about company, about the war, about Camp Hearn and Captain Morrison, and the Americans who proved that kindness was the strongest weapon. Through the window, the Fort Worth sun set over the stockyards, the same sun that had risen over Camp Hearn 79 years ago, the same sun that had watched enemies become humans, become friends, become family. James Martinez III stood behind the counter and thought about his great-grandfather, about the choice he had made to cook for enemies despite his grief, about the courage that took, about the legacy it created. On the wall beside the photographs hung a framed piece of paper, yellowed with age, written in 2 languages, Japanese and English. It was a recipe for Texas barbecue, written in Coe's handwriting, given to Private Martinez in 1945. A promise, a bridge, a hope that someday the world would be different. And it was. Not perfect, not completely healed, but different, better, because 2 people had chosen to see each other as human, because a Texas ranch boy had cooked breakfast for the enemy, because a Japanese clerk had accepted kindness from a monster who turned out to be a man. James looked at the Japanese-American family eating together, looked at the fusion menu, looked at the photographs of his great-grandfather, and he understood. This was the victory that mattered. Not the battles won, not the enemies defeated, but this: connection, understanding. Love made visible through food and memory, and the refusal to let hate have the final word. The grandmother finished her meal, approached the counter, handed James a photograph. This is my grandmother at 90, she said, 6 months before she passed. She wanted me to give this to the Martinez family if I ever came here. James took the photograph. It showed an elderly Ko Yamamoto in a garden, smiling, surrounded by flowers and vegetables growing in neat rows. On the back, written in English, to the Martinez family. Thank you for teaching me that enemies can become friends, that hate can become love, that breakfast can change the world. I grew this garden because you taught me to plant hope instead of anger. May it bloom forever. James felt tears on his cheeks. He showed the photograph to his father, who had come out from the kitchen. His father, who had heard the stories but never quite believed them, looked at the image of Coe's garden and understood. This was real, all of it. The breakfast, the transformation, the legacy. His father embraced the Japanese-American woman. Thank you for bringing this, for carrying the story forward. That is what we do, she said. We carry the stories. We teach the next generation. We prove that peace is possible, one meal at a time. The restaurant filled with the evening crowd, people of all backgrounds, all nationalities, all coming together over Texas barbecue with Japanese influences, over food that told a story of transformation and hope. And somewhere in whatever place exists beyond this world, Private James Martinez and Ko Yamamoto looked down at the restaurant they had built together, at the legacy they had created, at the proof that choosing compassion over revenge was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. They had brought breakfast instead of bullets, tomorrow instead of yesterday, mercy instead of revenge, and the world slowly and perfectly had become a little bit better because of it. The sun set over Fort Worth. The lights of the restaurant glowed warm against the gathering darkness. Inside, people ate and laughed and shared stories. And the lesson of Camp Hearn lived on, because this is what it means to be human. Not the fighting, not the victory, but the moment when you look at your enemy and choose to see a person. The moment when you break bread with someone you were taught to hate. The moment when you realize that breakfast can change the world. That is the story of Camp Hearn. That is the story of 24 Japanese women and the American soldiers who fed them. That is the story of how a Texas ranch boy named Martinez learned that his mother was right. Feed everyone who comes to your table. Feed them well. Feed them with love. Even enemies. Especially enemies. Because that is how you win the war that really matters. Not the war of nations, but the war for human decency, for compassion, for the belief that we are all at our core just people trying to survive, trying to go home, trying to find meaning in a world that often makes no sense. And sometimes in rare and beautiful moments, we succeed. We see each other, we feed each other, we choose love over hate. And the world becomes, for one breakfast at a time, a little bit more human. That is the legacy of Camp Hearn. That is the breakfast that broke the war. That is the truth that propaganda could never destroy. We are all human. And that humanity, that simple, profound, difficult humanity, is worth fighting for, worth feeding, worth preserving, one breakfast at a time, forever.